So for today's follow-along exercise, we're going to be looking at a historic botanical illustration of field poppies. But since we'll be making our own botanical illustrations today, I've mixed it with some other illustrations. So you'll have a choice of flowers to choose from and historic references that you can mix together like this. We'll be working in a 4H pencil, so that's a very light pencil, and I'd like you guys to use really light marks when you're putting this down. But so it shows up on the screen, I'm going to make sure that my marks are fairly dark, so I'm going to be using darker marks than you should. So to start with, you're going to want to figure out where you're going to put your main composition. You can do this using just super simple shapes, so I'm just going to use 2 circles. Botanical illustration involves a close look at natural subjects, but it also involves ideas of composition. So, you might consider on your main page, for instance, doing a diagonal line, placing part of it here, part of it here. You might consider dividing your page into quarters, having different information in different quarters. There are a couple of techniques I'll show you in class for doing this. And here, I'd like to show you an approach for creating flowers with leaves that are kind of moving into each other. So we start with our circle, but then I'm going to draw a smaller oval in the center here. And another smaller oval that just sort of intersects here. And for this one, I'm going to draw another oval here. So basically the circle is one side, and now I'm making smaller and smaller sides. And again, you want to make these marks really light. I'm just making them dark so they show on the screen. And let's have another little oval kind of intersecting here. Now that I have these marks, I can use them to carve out the shape of the flower. So on this one, I'm going to start with like a swooping kind of C shape coming across here, that then ducks back in. This is going to come inwards as well. And then I can just follow the edges of this outer circle to create some of the petals. And you can break them up. So this petal is kind of broken in. I'll bring this in here. Now this oval, I want to start it just a little bit further down, so I'll just do that. But when coming into the petals, all I have to do now is break in to the circle. So the circles, the ovals, they show the outermost edges of the petals as well as the base of the petals. And then you just use your pencil to kind of cut it into smaller and smaller petals. And this way they're in perspective and they're, kind of even. You don't want them to be too even because that's not natural, but they're going to be fairly even. So this is the inside of the petal. Just cutting through the outside. And I can even create more petals on the outside here. And then it's the same kind of thing for this other petal where I'm using the oval as the outer edges, the other flower that is. So I'll start by doing just the outside of this flower. And then cutting in with the petals. We've got one that's folded over the other. And this one, sometimes it helps, you might want to turn your paper kind of over for this so you can see, so you don't like move your pencil in the wrong way. I'm just going to cut into this oval shape. And again, I'm just following the edges of the ovals I've laid out. Create a natural flower form. And I'm going to put in just a thin line showing the stems of these flowers. Remember that the stem is going to kind of be based around the center of the flower, so you want to center it that way. And I also want to place in some buds. So I'll have a bud here. We can have one here. And I'll put just a few lines here, which are going to be my text. So now we're ready to start painting. I'm going to lightly erase this. In general, you want to make your marks light to begin with so you don't have to erase the paper, as the process of erasing kind of damages the paper. I'm just going to do this, you'll still on the screen be able to see these marks, but you don't really want to see too much of the marks. The technique we'll use for this painting is glazing. So we'll have just gone over this. And I'm going to start by mixing together an ultramarine blue. I'm recommending the glazing technique because botanical illustrations are often very controlled, and glazing allows us a lot of control in the way that we build up layers and details. And the way that we do glazing is I'm going to start by looking for the darkest areas. So anywhere that's sort of dark, I'm going to try to fill that area in. So for instance, the folds in the petals, you don't want to cover the whole area. You want to leave clear spaces available in your painting because we want the other colors to show through. But the idea here is that you're sort of thinking as if, if your eyes were a camera and the exposure was dialed way, way up, where would the dark areas be? On this one, I'm starting in the darker area. And if you want to lighten up your color, you can graduate your wash as you move towards lighter areas. But again, the key thing here is just leave enough clear areas so that when we start layering the color has a chance to show through. I'm going to use fine brush strokes to create the stem. So I'm just trying to use the very tip of my brush for this. And then I'm going to paint some of these buds. And since I'm waiting for the ultramarine paint up here to dry, I'm also going to do a few leaves. Now you could just do these by mixing, but I'm just doing this to give myself something to do so I don't mess around with the flowers at the top. And I'm just going to use the shape of my brush using some of those brush techniques we learned in the beginning of class to get these leaves down. Once this is dry, I'm going to come in with a second layer of ultramarine just to darken up the darkest areas. So we've got the center is quite dark. I want another layer back here. As you can see, once the paint dries, it allows you a lot of control over where your brush strokes are going. So the paint's not moving around quite as much as it would if the paper were wet. I'll just add a little bit of darker color at the base of these buds. And now I'm ready to move in with my layers of different colors. So I'm going to use two reds for this, a warm red and a cool red. So I have crimson red, and I'm also going to be using as my warm red vermilion. So crimson will be the cool red. And so just mixing up about 1 part vermilion with 2 to 3 parts water. I have to wait for this to be totally dry, so just give me a minute. I'm going to start in the lightest areas and go all the way over the blue. And you'll see that the color underneath gets absorbed in the color that we're putting on the surface. And so insofar as like why you wouldn't just mix the two colors together beforehand, you absolutely can. But one of the helpful things about a glazing technique is it separates tone from color. So sometimes it can be difficult to differentiate the lightness and darkness of something from the hue of something. So that is the actual color of something. And this just allows us to separate the light and dark values. So we're doing the light and dark values with the blue. And then all we have to think about is layering color for the rest. And you don't have to follow the form of the flower while you're doing this wash. The reason I am is simply that in case the blue hasn't totally dried, which it hasn't, I want to just angle my brush so that I'm starting in the lighter areas and then moving the brush into the bluer areas so we don't get just the blue kind of moving straight into the red and muddying up the areas I've left white. If you've put down too much color, not to worry. You can use the lifting out technique just to lift out any extra little bits of color. If your paint has already dried, simply wet your brush and you'll be able to go over some areas. You won't be able to lift out quite as much as you would if the paint were still wet, if you let it dry, but you're still able to lift out little highlights. As I wait for that to dry, I'll just take some pure yellow and glaze that over these little buds. I can also glaze the yellow over some of the leaves or mix up a green by adding the yellow to the blue and just making some of these darker. I like the effect of leaving some of the areas just blue. It kind of allows the paint to recede into the background. So you can decide if you want to kind of go over all of these or just leave some of these blue. As I wait for this area to dry, I'll move into writing. And I found the easiest way to do this is just, instead of trying to do each letter first, just try to create lines that are angling the same way. So about the same amount of lines as what you're about to write. I'm going to write common field poppy, so field. And now when I come into write, I'm going to mix together, I'm going to take a little bit of the ultramarine blue and a bit of burnt sienna to make a much darker color. I'm using the very tip of the brush. I'm just kind of following the angles that I've put down. I'm just going to quickly use a hairdryer here, so hopefully the paint won't just go everywhere. Well, the paint's moved a little bit, but I actually like that effect. But in class, hopefully this isn't going to happen. We'll have a little bit more time. Now I'm going to start layering in more nuanced color. So I'm going to make more of that burnt sienna and ultramarine blue mix. to come in with the center of these poppies. And then I'm going to use my cool red, the alizarin crimson, test out some areas of it just using it pure, and some areas I can mix with the blue to create a even darker shade. But I'm going to start just using it pure and then see if I need to darken up any areas still. And the key thing here is you're not covering everything. You want to allow the different colors to show through in different degrees. And we can leave it there, or if you want to even add more depth, you can take a glaze of the yellow over some of the lighter areas of red, just to add another color to the mix. Although I feel like it's starting to get a little bit muddy, I might just come back in with a little bit of vermilion here. Once this is dry, you can erase any pencil marks that are remaining. And I'll try and have a couple of these pens in class. Again, with watercolors, you tend to reserve really light areas. But for things like flowers, where sometimes you have really tiny little dots, a little bit of white paint is not a bad thing. And you can use white acrylic, white gouache, but I'm just gonna dot in some of these lighter areas. Okay, and I think we'll call it a day here so we can move on, everyone can move on to their own compositions. So hope this was helpful and thanks for watching.